All right, good morning, St. Mark. We're going to begin our new chapter this week, and this is the Age of Jackson. That is Andrew Jackson. He will be your seventh president of the United States. We're going to just briefly talk about John Q. Adams, and then we'll focus most of our time on what Jackson was up to, because he will be one of the most influential presidents, arguably one of the most influential presidents, until you get to people like Abraham Lincoln and FDR. He's responsible for the Trail of Tears, which effectively removes many Native Americans in the American Southeast and moves them west, takes them from their land. We'll talk about the Species Circular Act, and then we'll talk briefly about MVB, which is Martin Van Buren. He'll be the eighth president, and he's hand-selected by Andrew Jackson. The first thing I wanted to get into, which some of you missed this on your homework, was the idea of the rigged election. In the rigged election, you had 5 different candidates running for president in 1824. The main people that are going to stand out are going to be John Q. Adams and Andrew Jackson. You're going to have Henry Clay, you're going to have John C. Calhoun, and you're going to have another guy named, I believe, William Crawford. Crawford's going to end up having a stroke halfway through, so he's going to drop out. Henry Clay will eventually end up throwing his support behind John Q. Adams, and John C. Calhoun will just not have enough votes. So what's happening in the 1824 election is that it's actually pretty close, and Jackson received most of the popular votes, but he does not. He receives the plurality, but he does not receive the majority. So you can receive the majority of popular votes, but if you do not have enough electoral votes, then it goes to the House of Representatives to once again choose the initial top 3 candidates and then have them re-vote on those top 3. So what ends up happening is Jackson got the popular vote. When they went to the re-vote, John Q. Adams was able to get enough people in Congress to sway the election towards him. And so the House of Representatives effectively gives the job of president in 1824 to John Q. Adams. Now, many people think that is rigged because after he becomes president, he then gives Henry Clay, who's a member of the House of Representatives, who voted for him, the job of Secretary of State. And so that's why people thought it was rigged, because Henry Clay threw his support behind John Q. Adams because he knew that he was going to get this position. There's no official evidence that this is actually what happened, but this is what anybody who wanted Jackson as president thought. So it was this huge conspiracy theory, kind of what we think about with the Clinton and Trump election a few years ago. So this is just another picture of John Q. Adams. He was just president. He was a one-term president. He called for higher tariffs on imported goods. He was all about federal government having a lot of the power, meaning they had more power than the state governments. He focused on internal improvements. And honestly, he was a president that was kind of ineffective because the Congress did not support him, because they were still mired in this John Q. Adams on one side and Andrew Jackson supporters on the other. So he really basically was fighting these different, his opponents the entire time rather than being able to get stuff done. He's better known for being a congressman after being president. So he did actually he was a lifetime political representative in the United States. And he didn't just go on a book tour or anything like that. And the story is that he actually died while working on the floor of the House of Congress. He would have been about 80 or so when he did that, just in case you wanted to know. And then we have the 1828, the Tariff Abominations. This is going to be passed under John Q. Adams. It was never supposed to be passed. And a tariff is a tax, and of course, abomination is not something good. So they're basically saying this tax of bad stuff. It's a huge tax on imports, and it was supposed to be a political play that would have gained Jackson for the upcoming election. It would have given him supporters because he could have shown that the people who liked Jackson, they were supporting the manufacturers in New England because they were charging more for goods coming into the country from Europe. And really what was happening is New Englanders were manufacturing a lot of goods, but they were still being put out of business by European goods that are coming in that are still selling for cheaper. So they wanted people to buy American, or at least pretend they wanted people to buy American. Well, most of the goods are being made in the Midwest and New England, and the South hates this tax because they don't have a lot of manufacturing. Think plantation farms and just smaller farms. They import a lot of their goods from Europe because they kind of still feel that they're the aristocracy of Europe who just happen to be in the southern part of the United States. So they hate this tax because it makes the goods that they like to buy more expensive. The Midwest and New Englanders want this tax because it will essentially make their goods cheaper to buy than foreign goods. So nobody really thinks this tax is going to pass. And they were all just playing this game of like, oh, we'll support it. We'll support this tax that nobody likes just to gain votes in New England. But what happens is it actually does pass. And now you're looking at this super handsome guy. This is Vice President John C. Calhoun, who will be like a mover and shaker in history for like 30, 40 years. He comes up with the doctrine of nullification. So, to reiterate, this bad tax, the Tariff of Abominations, was passed. People hate it. Okay? So he comes up with this idea of like, oh man, that was not supposed to pass. We totally messed up. What are we going to do? So he comes up with a doctrine of nullification, and it states that each state can nullify or get rid of laws passed by Congress that they do not feel follow the Constitution. It's just this whole idea of nullifying things, getting rid of something that you don't like. So it's just saying, okay, that's cool, federal government. You pass something, but as states, we don't like it. It violates our constitutional right. We're not following it. That's essentially the doctrine of nullification. So the ongoing issue with the tariff is that Jackson vetoes this nullification process because he doesn't want a big issue. So what happens with the tariff abomination? It gets passed during John Quincy Adams, but enforced during Andrew Jackson's presidency, because he'll be elected within like 6 months of the tariff being passed. So how they end up solving this solution, and by the way, the guy on the left is Henry Clay. So you can see that this is when they get a little bit older. We're getting closer to the American Civil War. So 1833, they come up with a compromise tariff. So this is yet another tax. What it says is that, okay, we all agree the Tariff of Abominations is not good. We messed up. It shouldn't have been passed. But we have a solution. We're coming up with a compromise tariff, which will gradually lower that tax on the imports as the years go by. So it kind of makes people feel better, like, okay, in 4 or 5 years, this tax won't even exist. We'll be fine again. And that's how they get around that issue, to kind of make the Southerners happy. Because Andrew Jackson has a lot of Southerners and Westerners who support him. Then the Force Bill is passed in 1833. This is during Andrew Jackson's presidency. So I'm kind of backtracking a little bit. He comes up with the Force Bill, and he says that the president can use the military whenever he needs to enforce acts of Congress. And the South, being Southerners, and just wanting to be like, no, we believe in states' rights, say, that's fine. We nullify this act. Meaning we think this is unconstitutional. We don't follow it. So it was kind of a tit for tat, going back and forth of like who has the power. The Force Bill is an example of how Andrew Jackson will utilize the executive branch and his presidency to gain more power over these other branches. All right. So we talked about the Tariff Abominations that was started during John Quincy Adams and went into effect during Andrew Jackson's presidency. But before we even get to Andrew Jackson's presidency, I want to talk about what did it look like when Jackson ran for president the second time in 1828. This is when we start getting into what we consider today the mudslinging. We don't call it mudslinging. We call it talking trash about our opponents today. And it's pretty messed up. But if you look at this is the picture on the right is symptoms of a locked jaw. You can see that the guy is sewing Andrew Jackson's mouth shut to keep him from talking trash. And you can also see on the left, you have this handout. And if you just look at the bold words, Jackson Forever, Presidency, Man of the People, Old Hickory, they're showcasing things that he is known for. So for people who just want to scan something like, oh yeah, Old Hickory, Battle of New Orleans, this guy is the man of the people. Andrew Jackson portrayed himself as the common man, the man of the people, the man of the frontier, where John Q. Adams was considered this kind of royal elitist. Like, oh, we sit in, these all men's clubs smoking cigars and drinking fine whiskeys and scotches, and we look down upon the people. So that's kind of how they portrayed each other. They even considered John Q. Adams used to like to go swimming naked in the Potomac River every morning because he lived in D.C. And so they talked about how he was just like super scandalous about that. Andrew Jackson, on the other hand, got dragged through the mud for all of his duels, which he did fight a lot of duels, for the fact that he liked martial law. He did kill some of his own men for treasonous acts during some of the different battles that he was in charge of. And they also slandered his wife, which was pretty unfair, calling her an adulterer because they actually got married. Andrew Jackson and his wife Rachel were actually married before she was fully divorced. This is a picture of Jackson's inauguration. And the biggest thing that I always think about this, and this is what I learned in like 5th grade, was that they had this big, I forget, it was like 2-ton round of cheese on the White House lawn to help feed all of these people. And I just think of how gross that is as people go up and cut off a piece of cheese or use their dirty hands and get that cheese. And it's true. I'm not making that up. And you can see this is actually what the White House looked like. People were in the White House. They were like tearing the wallpapers. They were destroying furniture because he was considered the man of the people. People flocked to see Andrew Jackson, who was grieving his wife who had recently died and was just trying to get away from the crowd. And we're going to stop there and we'll come back to Jackson's profile and then in the next day. So hopefully, please ask me any questions because I know the Tariff Abominations and all this nullification can get a little confusing. Thank you.